On my homepage here, I'm currently logged into my account and I would like to upvote Bubble. I can select this icon. You'll now see that it has ran that workflow and added me to the list of all of the users who have upvoted this product. Hello, my name is Lachlan Kirkwood, and today I'll be teaching you how to build a product hunt clone entirely out of no-code using Bubble. Bubble's by far one of my favorite no-code tools, as it is a complete end-to-end solution that gives you the ability to design your own front-end application, create a series of workflows and logic to stitch it all together, as well as the functionality to integrate with third-party services and plugins. For those of you who don't know me, I've spent the past year working with the Bubble team to write their How to Build blog series. This series took a list of the top products out there on the market, like Airbnb, Uber, and Spotify, and explained the step-by-step process to rebuilding them with no code using Bubble's tool. So now this is exactly what I'm doing with my own tutorials. Within this particular course, I'll be walking you through the step-by-step process of recreating your own product hunt clone. This will include features like registering user accounts, allowing users to launch a product across the platform, displaying a list of all of the products by the date that they were published on a homepage, viewing the full information of a product on a dynamic product page, upvoting those products, and allowing users to comment on each of those products as well. So grab your Bubble editor and let's get right to it. The first feature I wanted to tackle in our build today isn't actually a core feature that our users will interact with. Instead, I wanted to take the time to explain how we can set up and configure our own custom database within Bubble. Now, for our tutorial today, I've created a Notion doc that entails all of the different data types and fields I'll be adding, as well as a list of all the features I would like to add throughout the build. I'd recommend also creating one as I go along, as it allows you to tick off every single item as you complete it. Another thing I'd like to mention is that if any point throughout my tutorial or in any module you find yourself getting a little bit confused, I strongly recommend that you pause the tutorial and rewind it to just watch that section over again. I will of course be explaining things in as much detail as possible. However, I completely understand that if you're new to Bubble, it can sometimes be a little bit overwhelming. So I'm going to jump ahead now into my Bubble editor over here and I'll start building out my database. Once I'm in my new editor here, I'm going to head over to my data tab, and now I can start to build out what exact data types and fields I would like to add. And by default, you'll notice that Bubble already has a user data type pre-built, and that will include an email address field. It will also store a user's passwords, however it just doesn't display this in plain text, even though you are the admin of this editor. But before I go and build out all of the data fields that will sit under our user data type, what I'll need to do is actually create all my different data types, because I will also need to, within our data fields, link those through to different data types. So I'll be creating a truly relational database. And if I jump back into my Notion doc here, I can see that I have a couple of different data types. So I'd like to add in a user, a product content, a comment, and then a data type for the publish date. And I'll be explaining all of these in a lot of detail as I run you through how you can add them into your own database. But let's start by adding in all of these key data types into our Bubble editor. So I'll start by adding a data type here and I'll call this product. Now I will create a separate data type called product content. And at this point in time, I'd also just like to highlight why I've created two different data types for the product and the product content. When you're working in Bubble and you add in a list of data fields, every time you'd like to, for instance, call a product to be displayed, the Bubble editor will load all of the data fields that are associated with that data type. Now, if you're building an app like Product Hunt, you'll recognize that on the home page, it displays an entire list of products. And if you were to replicate this in Bubble, every time you load an individual product, it would start to become overwhelmed at how much data it needs to load from your database, meaning that it would slow down over time. So a workaround that I personally prefer is splitting your data types when possible. And in this case today, I'll be splitting our product content from our product. So to keep things streamlined on our product data type, I'd like to just store the essential information that I need to display on our homepage for this product. So this can be things like the title of the product, the featured photo of the product, like the little thumbnail photo, as well as the headline or tagline for this product. Whereas I would then, in my product content, like to store all of the larger files, which will normally just include things like a description, because that text can become quite lengthy, and also just a list of all of the main images that we'd like to display for this product. Then throughout my application, whenever I need to display the images of a product, I can simply just call upon it by referring to the product's product content. And when we actually set up the data fields, this will make a lot more sense when I explain how you can link these two data types together. But before I do that, there's two other data types I would like to add. One is for comments across our application, so every time someone creates a comment. And the other will be called the publish date. Now, the reason I'm recording a publish date as a different data type is because on our Product Hunt homepage feed, you'll notice that products are obviously categorized together. However, you'd also note that each product is categorized by the date it was published. So in our database, what I'd like to do throughout our build is just create a new date every single day, and then attach a list of products to that date. And that is all the data types I would like to add in our build today. Now we can move along and start to add in all of the data fields within these. So I'll head back into my Notion doc here, and I'll start by working around my user data fields. And I can see here that I will start by adding in a user's name, their headline, their website link, and also their profile photo. So over on my user data type, I will create a new field, and I'll start by just simply adding in the user's name. And this field type will just be a plain text field. I'll choose to create that. Then I'll need to create the headline of a user. And this is normally just a brief description that Product Hunt allows you to include on your profile. And this again will be another text data field. And the next data field will be the website link. So this allows someone to feature a link to their website on their profile. And that will just be another text field type. And then I will create another field, and this will be the user's profile photo. And this will just be an image field type. I'll jump back into my Notion doc, and I can see that the two remaining fields are the followers and the users that someone is following. So I'll head back into my database and I'll create a list of followers. And the way I'll be registering followers throughout our application is a list of users. So every time someone follows another person on our platform, I will add that person into a list of that person's followers. So I'll select that our followers will need to be a user field type, and then I will select that this will be a field with multiple entries. I'll create that. And then I'll create another field for the following, which is again a list of users that someone is following. So this will be a user field type, and I'll tick that this is a list with multiple entries. Now I can jump into my Notion doc, and I can tick off that I've added in all of my data fields for my user data type. If I'm to scroll on down, I can now start to build out the data fields for my product. So I'll start by adding in the title of the product. So I'll select our product here. I'll create a field, and this will be a title. And this of course will just be a standard text data field. Then there will be the headline for the product. So much the same as when we created it for our user data type. This again will just be another text field. And then there was also another website link for this product. So I'll select this to be a text field again. Now within our product, I'd also just like to register a single thumbnail image. So this will just be an image that's displayed on our home page before someone can click through and view the full list of images for this product. So I'll create a field. I'll call this thumbnail image, and this will be an image data field, and then I will just create that. And now below this, I would like to create a data field for the list of people who have made this product, so those who have contributed to it. And this will be a list of users, because users of course have built this product. So I'll select that this is the user data field type, and then I will tick that this is a list with multiple entries, because multiple makers could contribute to one single project. So I'll create that. And then I would also like to create a list of those who have upvoted this product. So I'll call this field upvotes, and this field type will be a list of users. Similar to our followers data field under our user data type, our upvotes will just be a list of users. So every time someone upvotes a product, I will add them to that list of total users who has upvoted that product. And of course, I can perform a count on how many people are in that list and display that as the total number of upvotes for that product. So I'll register this field type as a user property, and then I will select that this is a list with multiple entries. And now what I'll need to do is link out our product to the additional data type called product content. So that way, if at any point I'd like to display the product description or the images, I can call upon that additional product content data type and display the information stored within its data fields. So I'll create a data field here, and I will call this additional content. Got a typo there. And then I will link this field through to our product content data type. And I won't need to select that this is a list with multiple entries, because I'll only be linking one product content to one product. So I'll create this data field. And then finally, the last field I'd like to create is just the launch date of a product. Now, by default, Bubble will register the created date here, as you can see. So every time a product is created, it will in fact register that within our database. But what I'd like to do is just format this as a plain text entry, because when it is just a text value, I can manipulate it or format it in whichever way I would like, which I will need to do later on in my build. So I'll create a new field, and I'll call this product launch date. And then I will indicate in brackets that this is the text version of our launch date. So as you can imagine, this field type will just be a text entry. So I will select to create that. And that is all the data fields I'll need to add to our product data type. So I can jump back into Notion. I will highlight all of these fields and tick off that they have been added. Then I will need to add the product content data fields, and this one's pretty straightforward. I'll just need to add in a description and also a list of images. So I'll jump back into Bubble, I'll head to our product content data type, and I'll start by adding a new field, and I'll call this description. And this will just be a standard text field. Now I would like to also store a list of images within this product content. So when a user uploads, let's say, some screenshots of their product or some mock-up assets, they can store these within our additional product content data type. So I'll create a new field here, and I'll call this images. And this will of course be an image field type. And I will be selecting that this is a list with multiple entries, because a maker can upload more than one image to a product. So I'll choose to create that. And this data type is nice and simple to build out. There's only two data fields. I'll then jump back into our Notion doc. I'll tick those off. And I can see that our comment data type is next, which is another easy one to create. So I'll jump back into Bubble. I'll head to our comment data type, and I'll choose to create a new field. And the first field I'll be creating is the comment content. So this will be the actual content that is written within a comment. And this will just be a text field type. So I'll create that. And then what I'll need to do is actually link this comment to a product that it's published to. So I'll create a new field and I'll call this comment product. And this field type will need to link back to an original product. So I'll select that this is a product. And because I'm only linking one comment to one product at a time, I won't be selecting that this is a field with multiple entries. So I can now create that. And again, that is all I'll need to create for our comment data type. It's another simple one. The last data type I will need to create is just the manual published date. So I would also like to store this date as a text input, because later on in another module, I'll be overlapping when the product's date, which is formatted as text, also matches our published date that's formatted as text. And then within this published date, I would like to store a list of all of the products that have been published on it. So I'll jump over into our editor and I will head to our published date, and then I will create a field called date text, and this will just be a standard text input. And then I'll create another field, and this field will be called products on date. And this will be a product data type. And I will be selecting that this is a list with multiple entries, because of course multiple products can launch on a single date. So I'll create that. And that is the last of the data fields I'll need to create in our custom database today. I did also just want to take this time to explain the use of privacy rules within your application here. So you'll notice that when we were adding our data types, by default, Bubble has added some privacy rules to each individual entry. And if you were to click into it, you could see the default values that Bubble has created. So you can see here that under our product data type, the product itself is only visible to the person who has created it, which is not the experience we'd like to create within our product hunt clone. What we'd like, of course, is for a user to be able to publish their product on our platform, and for every other user in our community to be able to view it. So what we'll need to do is actually delete these privacy rules by default. Or else you'll find that when you ship your application or view it as a demo, you won't actually be able to see any of the content if you're not logged in as the person who has created that data entry. So I'm simply just going to head over to the trash can icon here, and I will click that. And now you can see that our product, its privacy setting has been switched to publicly visible. I'll then need to do that for the rest of our data types. So I'll jump into our comment here. I will delete its privacy rules. I'll head to our product content. I will also delete its privacy rules. And then finally, I'll head to our publish date and delete its privacy rules. And you'll now see that all of these data types are publicly visible across our application. Then back in my Notion doc, I can tick off the last of the data fields that I've added to our publish date data type. And from here, you can see how easy it is to build out your own custom database within Bubble. I completely understand that if you're new to Bubble, this can be a little bit confusing from the first instance of creating a database. However, like everything, of course, the more practice you have, the better you'll get at it. As I mentioned earlier on in this module, if you found yourself confused at any given point throughout this tutorial, be sure to jump back to that stage and rewatch any of the instructions that I gave you. Now that we've taken care of most of the housekeeping, we can dive on into one of the actual first core features, I guess, that users will get to engage with across our platform. And that is a function to create and list a product on the actual product hunt platform itself. Now this is quite a big module, so if at any given time you find yourself confused or you just don't have the time to finish it, I'd recommend pausing it and rewinding it to get some additional insights. However, I will be explaining everything in as much detail as I possibly can as I walk you through it. Let's jump on over into our Bubble editor and I will get you started. Now the first thing we'll need to do in our Bubble editor is create a new page within our application. So I will add a new page and I will call this new. I will create that. Now on this page, once again, the first thing I'll be doing is updating the background color. But I'd also just like to highlight that I'll be splitting our process of creating a new product into two separate pages. And the reason I'll be doing this is because it replicates the same workflow that Product Hunt has when you submit a product on their website. So if I was to head over to Product Hunt at the moment and choose to post a product, the first page it will send me to is, if you look in the URL string here, it says new, and it will ask me to add in a product URL here. And at this point, it will only allow me to add in a unique URL of a product that hasn't been posted. So I'm just going to add in a dummy URL here that says new product to test.xyz. I'll select next. And now you'll see it sent me through to a separate page here called submission. And we'll be able to replicate this experience within our bubble editor. So if we head back into our editor, the first page I'd like to create is that initial page where we are storing a unique URL of a product that's yet to be posted on our platform. So on this page, I will grab a text element. I will add this into the center. I will update this text to display submit a product. I'll update that to be a H2 style font, as I always do. I'll just reduce the size of the total element and then center that horizontally. Then I will duplicate that heading. I'll move that down. I'll update the format of this to be a H3 just so it's a little bit smaller. And then I'll update the text to actually display link. Just reduce the size of that. And now I will add in an input field. So I'll drag this out across our page. And I'll update the name of this input field to be called website link. Now below this, I will add in a button element. And this button will just display next. Just drag that out so it's a little bit bigger. And then I will also center that horizontally. Now what I'd like to do is create a workflow when this next button is clicked that stores the information of this link and sends it through to the next page in our process, which is our submission page. So I'll choose to start edit a workflow, and then from our action step, I will choose a navigation event, and I will select a go to page option. And at this point, our submission page doesn't yet exist. So I can select to create a new page from our menu here. I will call this page submission. I'll select to create that. I will then choose the destination page to be a submission, and I won't be sending any data through that's stored within our database. What I would like to do though is actually send through the link of the product just to simplify the user experience on the next page. Now, of course, I could store this link within my database. However, there will be plenty of occasions where someone will add a link, but they won't actually finish posting their product. So what you'll find is that you'll quickly have lots of instances within your database where you're storing all of these links for no reason at all, which of course can slow down your application if you're just storing unnecessary data. So a great alternative to this is sending through what's called a page parameter. And essentially what this does is it allows you to attach a value within your URL string that's sent through to a page, which you can then extract on your next page and use that value anywhere you would like. So the way I'll be doing this is jumping into my workflow editor, and on our redirect action here, where I'm sending someone to the submission page, I will tick this box to send more parameters to a page, and then I can add a custom parameter. And I will call this parameter product link. And then I can add in a custom value for this custom parameter. So I will select that the value of this should be the input website links value. So the value of that input field. Now before I move on to building out our submission page itself, there's one last feature I'd like to create on this page. And that is creating a way to block a user from adding a product that already has been submitted to our platform. So essentially, if this link here isn't unique, so if it's already been published across an existing product, I won't allow the user to advance through to the next page. And the way I can do this is by jumping back into our workflow editor, and I can create a new workflow. I will choose from the elements option when an element is clicked. The element will of course be our next button. And then what I'll need to do is add in a condition to this workflow to only allow it to run when a certain behavior is met. And the condition I would like to add is just something that allows us to search through all of the products in our database and then identify if an existing product has the same link as the link that the user is adding onto our current page here. So I can select that this should only run when I will start by performing a search for something. I will search through all the products in our database. And I would like to only search for all of the products when the website link equals the same value as the website link input field on our page. So now this search will identify if a product already does exist with the same link that the user is trying to post. And then from here, I will need to identify when all of the products that could potentially have the same link that the user is trying to post, if the number of those is greater than, and then I will just manually type in the number 0. So if there's more than 0 products that have already been listed in our database with the same link that the user is trying to currently post, so essentially if one product already does exist with the same link, this workflow will run. And what I would like to do within this workflow is just display an alert message to prompt the user that a product with this link has already been posted to our application. So the way I can do this is of course by heading to our design tab again. I will grab an alert message. I will just drag this out below our button here. And then I will update the text of this alert to say this product has already been hunted. And I can update the default style to just be a warning alert, so it's red. I will also center that horizontally and just reduce the height of that. And of course, this being an alert, it won't actually display until we call it to within our workflow. So I'll jump back into our workflow editor, head back into the workflow we've just created with the condition on it. And when that condition is true, I will select from the element actions. I'd like to show a message, and it will automatically pull through our warning alert there that doesn't allow a user to advance through. Now, because this condition identifies the instances where a user is posting a product that has already been published to our application, I'll need to add a similar condition to our existing workflow here that allows us to identify when a link hasn't yet been posted, in which case we would allow the user to advance to the next stage of our submission process. So I'll click through to our first workflow that we've created, the one that sends a user through to our submission page with the parameter that we've just added in. And then back on the actual trigger of the workflow itself, I will create a condition here. And once again, I will only allow this to run when I perform a search through my database for all of the products where the website link equals the same value of the input website link on my page. And then I will need to identify when there is no instances of an existing product with the same link. So I will select when the count is, and then just type in the number 0. This workflow will now run. And a handy feature you can add to differentiate between the two workflows is just by updating the color of this workflow to be green, because it is a path that allows a user to proceed. And then I can update the color of the other workflow to be red, because this will trigger our warning message to a user. And that is all I would like to add to our first page here throughout our submission process. What I would like to do then is head over to our submission page and start to build out the rest of this experience. So once again, the first thing I'll be doing is of course updating the background color here. And then I would also just like to reference back to the Product Hunt experience itself. So the way Product Hunt has actually structured their UX is that it allows you to step-by-step add in additional information for your product. So it starts by asking you for the name, the tagline, and a thumbnail image for the product. Then once you have added that, you can select through to the next option, and it will allow you to add in the featured images. And then there'll be another option that allows you to identify who the makers are of this product. And this is all positioned on the exact same submission page. What they do, however, is just update the custom state of this page to display different form fields at different times. And once again, this is an experience we can easily replicate within Bubble, and I'll show you exactly how to do this. So if we jump back into our Bubble editor, we can start by selecting to add in a group element here, and I'll explain in a moment why I'm doing this. But I'd like to expand this group out over the page, and I will just update the group here to have a colored background just so I can see where it lies on my page. Of course, in the future I can then remove the color if I would like, but I will edit the style of this group. I will select that the background style should be a flat color, and by default it will just switch to a white color code. Then I can center this group horizontally in my page, and I can add in a title into this group. And then within this title, I can remove the existing text. I will add in my own text. I'll start by adding in an emoji. And this will just say, tell us more about this product. Of course, I'll update this to be a H2. I'll then reduce the size of that. And now, similar to our user registration page, I can go and add in some text and input fields below this. So I'll add in a title here to say name of product. I'll update this heading to be a H3. And then I can grab a input field, just a single line input. I will drag that out. And then I will update the name of this input to be called product name. Then from here, I will copy both the input field and the title. I'll drag these down. And then I will update the title to say tagline. And I will also update the name of this input to display tagline. And these will both just be standard text elements. And then I will duplicate this once again. And this title will be called website link. And of course, I will update the name of the input field to also be called website link. And then finally, there's one last field I'd like to add, and that is a thumbnail image. So I'll copy this title. I'll move that down. I'll make it roughly in line with those. Again, I apologize, I'm not too concerned about my design right now. I will also just extend this group out. I will then add in a picture uploader element. So I'll scroll on down, select the picture uploader, drag that out. And then I'll update the name of this to be called thumbnail image. And of course, I'll also update the title here to be called thumbnail image. I will just also reduce the width of that just so it's a square picture uploader. And now below this, I can just add in a button element. And I'll update the text of this to display next, semicolon, and then images, because that will be the next stage of our submission process. Now it's at this point that I would like to explain why I've added all of this into a group. So a group essentially works as a container in Bubble. So if I was to move this group across our page, you can see that all of that content has been stored within this group. And what I can do with a group is update the way and time that it is displayed within our application. And this is quite useful because when we're replicating Product Hunt's experience, where there's 3 different stages of the submission process, we can hide and display these groups whenever we would like throughout the process. So what I'd like to do is start by unselecting the option here that displays that the element is visible on page load. Now what that will do is hide this group by default. I will then also select the option to collapse this group's height when it's hidden, so that way it completely removes it from our page formatting when it's not being displayed. And then finally I will update the actual name of this group to be called Submission 1. So by default now, a user will be sent through from our first step of our submission process. They'll be redirected to our submission page here. And when they land on this page, there'll currently be nothing displaying as this group isn't visible on our page load. So what we can then do is create what's called a custom state that allows our page to register that this group needs to be displayed at a certain period of time. And for our tutorial today, I'll be adding a custom state onto our page. So I'll be selecting the gray page element here. And the way you can add a custom state is by heading over to the information icon here, clicking that, and then you'll see an option to add a new custom state to the element that you've selected. So once again, I just want to reiterate that I'm adding the custom state to our page itself, not the new group I've added, the gray element. I will select to add a custom state, and I will call this state name step 1. And I would like this state to be what's called a yes or no state. So essentially I would like to register if we're in step 1 of our submission process, and that will be a binary. So yes, we are in the step 1 stage of our process, or no, we're not in the step 1 stage of our process. And I will choose to create this custom state. Now for this custom state, I would like the default value of this to be yes, because when a user lands on our submission page here, I would like this group to display by default, meaning that they are currently in the step 1 stage of our submission process. Now I'm just going to click out of our custom state option here, but one thing I will note is that our group element here is still currently not visible. So what we'll need to do is create a way for it to recognize when the page's state is in the step 1 condition. And when this is true, we'll actually create a condition that allows this group to be displayed. So if we move over to our conditional tab here, once we've selected into our group, we can define a new condition. And conditions are another way to allow elements to react to certain behaviors or functions within your application. So in this case, I would like this group element to identify when the page's state is set into the step 1 process, which it is by default because we've got that yes field set as a default option. And when this behavior is true, I would like this group to actually be displayed on our page. So I'll select that I'll scroll on down and I will choose the submission option, and that's because our page is called submission. You'll see here it highlights a gray box because our page is also colored gray. So that's our page here that I'm selecting from. So when the submission page, it's step 1, so it's custom state that I've just added. When it is selected to yes, which of course it is by default, I would then like to create a behavior that happens. And the behavior I'll be selecting is the first option here, which says that this element is visible. And then I will select that box, meaning that it will be true. So now if I was to go and just show you a quick preview of this page, you'll see that this group itself actually displays on our page load, even though by default the value of it has been told not to display on our page. So here I am on our submission page, and as I mentioned before, you can see that our group is already displaying. Now, of course, from here, what I would like to do is create an option to update the state of this page to then display the second step within our submission workflow. So I'll move back over into our bubble editor here. And then what I would like to do is scroll up to our elements tree option here. I will select the drop down, and where our group here sits, I would like to click the eye icon, which just hides that from being displayed. Then what I would like to do is add in another group on our page, which allows us to display the step 2 of our submission process. So I'll update the group here to be called submission 2. And then once again, I will unselect that this element is visible on page load. And then I will also select that this element should collapse its height when it is hidden. Now this step in our submission process is used to allow a maker to upload all of the images they'd like to display on their featured product. So once again, I'll be grabbing a text element first, and I'll add in a title to this group. I will then just remove the text that already sits within that input field. I will add in a star emoji that product hunt uses within this step. I'll add a space, and then I'll type in, let's make this product look nice. I of course will update that to be a H2 style font. I will move our element up. And then I will add in another text element below that title. And this will just display gallery. I'll then also update this to be a H3 dark font, which doesn't really make much of a difference. Now what I would like to do is create a way for a user to upload multiple images to this product. Now one thing I will note is that if I scroll on down to our input forms and select our default picture uploader that comes with Bubble, I won't be using this in our case today because this only allows you to upload one single image at a time. Whereas I would like a user to be able to drag in multiple images at once. So a way to work around this is by just deleting our picture uploader there. And Bubble has a free plugin called a multi-file uploader that allows you to upload multiple files at once. So I'll move on over to our plugins tab here. Then within this, I will choose the add plugins option. And then I will search for the term multi. I will then scroll on down to the multi-file uploader drop zone plugin here, which is a free one built by Bubble. And I will choose to install this. Then once our plugin has been installed, we can jump back over to our design tab. We can scroll on down to our input forms here, and you'll see that you have an option now to add in a multi-file uploader. I will then select to stretch that out. And I'd also just like to add a background to this. I'll just make it a flat color again, except I'll make this a gray color so I can see it against my white group here. I can also probably just reduce the total size of that as well. Now, the thing I will note about the multi-file uploader is that it just displays a list of all the file names that a user uploads to it. What we will need to do is create a feature that actually displays a preview of all of those images. And the way we can do this is by adding in what's called a repeating group element. And repeating groups are quite a powerful element in Bubble. What they essentially allow you to do is display a list of items that you can pull from a unique data source. So a good example is that if you'd like to display a list of all the users within your database, you could just add in a repeating group and it will pull out all of that information for you. Now before I add in a repeating group, I would like to add in another group. So a group within our group. And the reason I would like to do that is because I don't want our repeating group to actually display until there are files within our drop-down zone here. And of course, as you saw before, groups are a powerful element that allow you to hide and display them based on current behaviors happening across different elements on our page. So I will scroll on up to our group here. I will add in another group. I'll stretch this out to be pretty much the full width of our initial group here. Now to help us determine where this group lies on our actual main group itself, I'm going to update the style of this group to be called group border. I will then edit the style and I will just update the color of the border for this group to be black and the width can be 2. I'll then move back to our design tab and you'll now see where that group lies on our page. As always, you can go and update the style of that once we finish actually building this out. But now within this group, I'm just going to expand that down a little, but I will add in our repeating group element from our containers option here. I will expand this out to be pretty much the whole size of that group. And as you can see, the repeating group will display a grid or a list based on certain items either within your database or a different data source. Now what I would like to do is first configure the type of content that I would like to display within this repeating group. So essentially I'd like this repeating group to display a preview of all of the image files that have been uploaded to our multi-file drop-down zone here. So I will update the type of content to be a file, because users will be uploading files into this picture uploader zone here. And then I will want the data source here to be the value of the file stored within our multi-file uploader. So I can scroll on down to our multi-file uploader here. I will select that, and I want it to be the value of those files currently uploaded. Now what I can also do with my group is update the layout style. So I will want this to be displayed horizontally, so across, and then I'll update the number of columns to be 3. And now you can see that it will display these horizontally, and a user can in fact scroll horizontally if there's more than 3 images as well. Then within our repeating group, what I would like to do is display images based on the files that have been uploaded to our drop-down zone. So I can scroll up here to our visual elements. I will select to add in an image into our repeating group here. And essentially what this repeating group will now do once this image has been added to it is that it will want me to identify what I would like to display within our first cell, and it will replicate that across every other cell. So you essentially add it in once and it duplicates it across every other cell of the repeating group. So in this case, I would like the image itself to display every single file image that's been added into our drop-down zone here. So just a preview of all those images. And in order to do this, I will select the image itself. I will add in a dynamic image. I will insert dynamic data and display the current cell's file. And you can now see that it has replicated that image across every cell of our repeating group. And there's one last thing I'd like to do with our repeating group, and that is to create a condition that only allows it to be displayed when there are files that have been uploaded to our drop-down zone here. Because if there aren't any files in this drop-down zone, I won't want this element to display. And the way I can do this is, of course, by heading to my group element. So not the repeating group or the image, but the group that they both sit within. So just make sure you're selecting the group with the black border around it. It'll tell you here, I'm selecting group C. I could update the name of this to be called group repeating group container. If I really wanted, you don't need to do that, but that's just what I'd like to do for point of reference. And then, of course, I would like to unselect that this element is visible on page load, and then also choose to collapse this element's height when it's hidden. So when it's not displayed, anything sitting under this group will move upwards. And then I will need to create a condition on this group that only allows it to be displayed when there is a file within our drop-down zone here. So I will define a new condition, and I will identify when I'll scroll on down to our multi-file uploader. So when our multi-file uploader here, its value, the count of how many files are in it is greater than, I'll just type in 0 manually. So now whenever there is more than no files within that uploader there, I will select that this element is visible and tick that that should be true. And now that will allow this group to be displayed once a user uploads a file or more into this drop-down zone. Then finally on this particular group, so the step 2 within our submission page, I would like to just add in one last field, and that is a description for our product. So I'll copy this title over here that says gallery. I will update this to say description. And then I will add in a multi-line input field, not a normal input field. Now the difference between a multi-line input field and a regular input field is that with a normal input field, if someone was to add in more than that single line of text, it would simply continue to scroll horizontally, Whereas in a multi-line input field, if someone adds in more than the width of the actual input field, it will just expand downwards based on how much content is stored within this. I will then just update the name of this input field to be called description. And I'll also update the name of my multi-file uploader here to be called product images. Now I will just expand this group downwards one last time. And I will add in a button element below all of our input fields here. And I will update the text of this to say next, semicolon, makers. I'll just reduce the width of that as well. And now what I would like to do is once again create our conditions that only allows this group here to display when it's needed. So when we're in step 2 of our submission process. And of course the way I can do this is by once again selecting on our page, so the gray element, which is called submission, heading over to the information icon, and I can add in another custom state. So as it stands, of course, we've got our step 1 state, which has a default of yes. In this case, I would like to add another state. I will be calling this one step 2, and this will once again be a yes/no option. I will then select to create this, and in this instance, I don't want there to be a default on this page. The only reason I added a default to our step 1 stage is because I wanted that to automatically display once our page was loaded. Whereas in this case, I only want this step 2 group here to be displayed once a user has selected that they're ready to advance to this stage in the submission process. Then what I'll need to do after adding in this state is heading back into our group here, so the submission 2 group. I will then add in a condition that allows this group to be displayed only when the step 2 stage is yes. So I'll define a new condition, and I will scroll on down to the submission option. Once again, the submission is our whole page itself. So when the submission page's step 2 in our workflow is yes, I will select that this element is visible, and that should be true. So I'll tick that box. Then of course I will need to create a workflow that actually switches the state of our page from step 1 to step 2, which will then automatically hide the first submission group and display this one instead. And the way I can do this is by scrolling up to our elements tree here. I can hide the group we've just added, so the submission 2 group. I'll tick the eye icon and that will hide that. I will then select the eye icon for the submission 1 group, and I'll create a workflow when the next images button is selected. I will select to start edit a workflow. And then within this workflow, I will search for an action called state, and it will set the state of an element. The element I would like to set the state for is our submission page. And I will be selecting from the state 1 option, which of course is the default value that's set to yes once our page is automatically loaded. And what I would like to do is switch this state to no once that button has been clicked. And then I would like to add another step into our workflow that switches the state of step 2 to yes, meaning that our next group will display and our first group will be hidden. So I'll add another step to our workflow here. Once again, I'll type in state and set the state of an element. The element I will be setting the state for is our submission page. The custom state in this case will be the step 2 state. And the value of this will need to be updated to yes. And now if I preview my page, you'll see that when I select the next button, it will hide our first group and display our next group. So I'll quickly just jump over into our development environment and show you a preview of what this looks like so far. Over in my editor here, I'm not going to worry about adding in any text fields yet, but I will select the next option, and you can see that it has changed the state of our page, hidden that first group, and then displayed our second stage of our submission process. And you can also see that our repeating group has been hidden. And I'll be able to show you how that functions properly once I give you a full preview of this whole experience. But for the meantime, we'll jump back into our bubble editor. And from here, we'll head into our design tab because there's one last stage we're yet to add within our submission process to complete it. And that is the stage that allows us to add in all of the makers who have contributed to this new product that we're submitting across our platform. So in order to build this, I will unselect that I want this group to be displayed. So I'll currently display nothing across my page. I will also grab a group element again. I'll drag this out of my full page. And then I will update the name of this group to be called Submission 3. Of course, I will unselect that this group is visible on page load and select to collapse this group's height when it's hidden. I will then add in a heading to this group. I will then backspace the text. I'll add in an emoji because that's what Product Hunt uses. And then I will have this title display who made this product, ? Of course, I'll update this to just be a H2 style font, make it nice and easy. And throughout this stage of our submission process, I would like a user to be able to add in all of the additional makers who contributed to this project. So in order to do this, I will be creating my own custom search function within Bubble. Now, as it stands, Bubble does have a search element that you can use here called a search box under your input forms. I won't be using this today, but I do just want to quickly explain what it does. It will allow you to search either through a list of static choices you add or a list of dynamic choices. So you could define something in your database that you would like to search for. In our tutorial today, though, I'm going to be showing you how to build out a custom search experience because when you search for a user on Product Hunt, you type in their name or their handle, and it will display a preview of all of the users who match that search query. And it will actually display both a profile photo and the name of that maker. Whereas the default search option here within Bubble will only allow you to display one field. So it might be something like a maker's name. Whereas I actually want to display the photo and the name of a maker across our platform. So I will be deleting this element and I will start by adding in a title onto our page just below our heading there. And I will update this to say makers. I will also update the style of this once again to be a H3. I will then just move that down a tad. And from here, I'll be adding in my own custom search experience. So I will select to add in just a regular input field. Drag that out. And I will update this input field to be called user search. And this will just be a standard text field. But in order to display a list of all of the users across our database who meet the same value of this search, I will once again need to leverage a repeating group element. So I'll add in a repeating group below this search element. I'll just expand that out so it's the same width as our actual input. And the first thing I'll need to do is, of course, update the type of content that our repeating group will be displaying. In this case, it will be a user because I'll be searching for all of the users within our database. And then the data source itself will need to perform a search for all of the users. And I would like to display a list of all of the users whose name matches the same value that's been added into our maker search bar here. So I'll add a new constraint and identify when all of the users' name, and then I will choose contains, not equals, because if I was to select equal, the value of the search box here would need to be identical to the value of a user's name, whether it be capitalized or have spaces in it. Whereas if you choose the contains option, if someone's searching for, let's say, all the Lachlan's in our database, they could just type in the letter L, and then it would start to give a suggested list of all of the makers who also have a name that begins with the letter L. So I'll be selecting the contains option, and then I will want the name to contain the value of our input search user experience here. So I'll select the input user search, its value. And then I would like to update the layout style of this repeating group to be extended vertical scrolling. And what that essentially means is that I can choose a default number of rows. I'll select this to be 2. And if there is less than 2 rows that actually meet the search query here, it will only display the 1 row. Whereas if there's more than 2 entries, the repeating group will then display all of the rows in our database that meet the same search query. And now within our repeating group, I would like to add in an image element. So I'll select to add in just a square image there. And I would like this to display the profile photo of the maker being searched. So I'll select to insert dynamic data, and I would like to display the current cell's user's profile photo. I will then also just move this profile photo up into the corner of our repeating group and just enlargen it a little bit. And then beside this, I will need to add in the text, so the name of the user who's being displayed. So I'll insert dynamic data and display the current cell's user's name. I'll just drag that out. And I'm happy to just keep things quite simple with this experience. The last thing I will need to do is then add in an icon next to this, which is just a simple plus symbol that allows a user to select to add that user to the list of makers. So I'll choose from an icon. I will then drag that icon in, and I will search for a plus icon. I'll just choose this option here. I could also just update the color of this icon, so I'll select edit and just paste in the product hunt color code that I had before, just so it's an orange. And from here, what I'll need to do is create an experience where the current user, so the person who's submitting this product, can search for a list of makers and then add anyone to the list of total makers who have contributed to this product. And then once they have been added, I would like to display all of those makers who have been selected in a repeating group. So what I can do is actually just copy across this repeating group I've already added, because I like the formatting of this and I don't want to have to recreate it. Then I can remove the plus icon. And what I'll need to do is create a state within this repeating group that temporarily stores a list of all of the makers, which we can then add to our database under the total list of makers once this product has been submitted. So once again, in order to create a custom state, I will select the element that I would like to create the state for. I will then scroll up to the information icon, and I will select to add a new state. And I'll be calling this state makers because I would like to store a list of all the makers who have been added. And because I'm selecting to add in a list of makers, I will need to choose from the option that is users. So I'll essentially be storing a user within this group. And of course, because there can be multiple makers of a single product, I will tick that this is a field with multiple entries. So I can save a list of multiple users to our repeating group here. So I'll choose to create this, and then I will close that option, and I will also need to update the data source of this repeating group. And the data source I will need to add, I will backspace the existing data source option, and before I search for a new data source, I will just update the name of this repeating group to be called repeating group makers, because this is where I'll be storing the verified makers of this product. Then I will head to my data source here, and I will select from our repeating group makers, so the current repeating group that we're working within. And I would like to display the makers, so the state of this repeating group. And now that will display any makers who have been added to our custom state, which of course means that when this plus icon is selected, we will need to set the state of our repeating group and add to it that user who has been selected. So the way I'll be doing this is by selecting the Start Edit Workflow when our plus icon has been selected. And then I will choose to add in an action. I will search for state, and I will select to set the state of an element. And the element will of course be our repeating group makers. So I will select repeating group makers here. And the custom state I'll be changing is the makers, so the list of makers. And I'll be adding to it the current cell's user. But because this is a list of users, I will need to add to the existing list another person. So the way I'll be doing this is by searching for the current state's value, so the repeating group makers, its existing makers, and even if there's no one in there, it's still a list of users. So it technically has an open value that can be added to. Then I will select to add in the current user that the person is selecting. So I will just type in plus, and I will choose to plus an item into this list. And I would like to add the current sales user, so the person who is being selected. Now it will add that person to the total list of makers within this current state, which of course we will then store within our database when the user finally decides to launch this product. Now back in my design tab, I can finish designing our group here and create another workflow and condition that allows this group to be displayed. I will also just copy our makers heading here, and I will move that above our list of finalized makers here. And I could just have this say something like verified makers. So these are the people who have been selected that have contributed to this product. And of course, if the current user would like to add themselves as a contributor, they can also just search for their own name within this search bar here and add themselves to this list. Now below our repeating groups, I would just like to add in one last button element. I'll drag that out, and this button will say launch. And before I create the workflow to actually launch our product, of course, I'm going to need to build out another workflow to change the state of our page to be able to display our submission stage number 3 here. So like before, I'm going to select our page element, so the gray page background here. I will just make sure this says submission because this is our submission page. I will then head on over to the information icon, and I will choose to add in one last custom state, and this will be called step 3. And once again, this will be a yes/no state. I will select to create that. And I will not be adding in a default similar to our stage in step 2. What I would like to do then is create a condition on our group here, so our group submission 3. I will create a condition that only allows this group to display when the current state of the page is within step 3 of our submission process. So I will define a new condition, and I will identify, I'll scroll on down to the submission page. When the submission page, its step 3 state is yes, this element is visible, and of course I will be ticking that that is true. And in order to make this functional, I will of course need to create a workflow on the step 2 group. So I will tick the eye icon here to hide our step 3 submission group. I will then tick the eye icon for our submission 2 group here. And then on our button here, I will select to create any workflow. And within this workflow, I'll be wanting to update the custom state of our page. So once again, I will be searching for the state option. I'll select to set the state of an element. I will select the element to be our submission page. And first I will need to turn off the custom state for step 2 within our submission process. So I will update the value of this to be no. And then I'll add in an additional step to our workflow. Once again, I'll be searching for setting the state of an element. The element, of course, will be our submission page. And I will want the step 3 state to be yes. And now that will remove the group number 2 and display the group number 3. And one thing I would like to mention is that even though we are hiding these groups, they will still store the same values that have been uploaded to them. So if a user is uploading files and then adding a description, and we hide this group, those values will still remain intact throughout those input elements. So that way when we launch our product, we can simply just match the data fields in our database with those input fields in our group. And after setting all of those custom states, which I know can be a little confusing if you're new to Bubble, so once again, I just want to reiterate that if you found any of this complex, I would recommend pausing this tutorial and re-watching it, just so you can get a good grasp of what's possible in Bubble. I think that this will create a much more intuitive user experience that matches the real world experience from Product Hunt. But once I have created all those custom states, I can hide the submission group number 2, display the submission group number 3, and finally create a workflow that allows us to launch this product. So I'll be selecting to start edit a workflow when the launch button is clicked. Now within this workflow, the first thing we'll need to do is create a new product. Now this workflow will be a little bit more extensive than anything we've created up to this point in time in our tutorial. But again, I'll be walking you through the individual steps and be explaining everything in as much detail as I possibly can. So the first thing we'll need to build within our workflow is an action to create a new product within our database. Now, if you remember, we are currently storing our products as a separate data type that is also linked to our product content. And I split these fields in my database because I wanted to reduce the amount of content that the Bubble editor would need to load. So what we'll be doing within our workflow here is creating the product content and then linking that to a new product when it's created. And I'll show you how this can be done. We'll start by selecting to add in an action. We'll then scroll on down to our data actions here and choose to create a new thing. The thing I would like to create is the product content, not the product yet. So I'll select the product content. And now I can match the on-page input fields with the data fields stored in my database. So I'll select to add a field. And then I'll begin by adding in the description of our product content. And this will be the value if I scroll on down to the multi-line input description field. And then finally, the only additional fields I'll need to add to our new product content here is just the list of images that we've added to our multi-file uploader. So I'll be selecting to add a field. I will choose to add in images, which of course is stored as a list of images within our product content data type. And what I'll be doing is selecting to add an image. And from here, I'll be adding in each individual file that's been uploaded into our drop zone element. So I'll select to add to this list of images. I'll scroll on down to our multi-file uploader. I will select its value. Now, in the past, when I used the multi-file uploader, I found that if you add all of the images at once, I'll sometimes experience a bug where it actually doesn't send that data through. So I personally prefer to add all of these images individually, and I'll show you how this can be done. So after I've selected to add in the value of the pictures and files that have been uploaded into our multi-file uploader, I'll select the More option here, and then I will select the item number, and I'll just type in the number 1. So now I'm adding to our total list of images just the first file that's been uploaded to our multi-file uploader, which means I'll then need to add in the item number 2, 3, 4, 5, how many I'd like to store. So I'll select to add another field. I'll choose from our images. I will add to it the multi-file uploader, its value, and then I'll select the More option again, and the item number 2. Then once again, I'll be adding in the images. I will add to that list the multi-file uploaders value and its item number 3. Now, just for the sake of our tutorial today, I'm just going to be keeping it at 3 files, but if you'd like to support up to 5 or 10 images, you'll need to manually add each of those options in. You could also on your page just add in a text element above the multi-file uploader that could just prompt a user to let them know that they're restricted to uploading only a certain amount of images. Now, once I've finished creating my product's content, I can add an additional step to my workflow where I'll be creating the actual product itself. So I will select the data tab once again. I'll create a new thing. Only this time the thing I'll be creating is the product. And once again, I'll be taking the time to match all of the on-page input fields with the data fields stored in our database. So I'll start by adding in the product's title. And this will of course be the value of our input product name. And then below this, I'll add in another field, which will be the headline of our product. And this will be the value of our tagline input field. Then there will be the thumbnail image. And this was just the value of our single picture uploader. So the picture uploader thumbnail image. Then there was the website link of the product. It's the value of our input website link. And now I would like to store the additional content, so the description of the product and also the images of the product. So I'll select that the additional content will need to equal the result of step 1 in our workflow, which means that we're now linking to this additional content entry that we've just created in our database. And now finally, there's one last field I'll need to add, and that is the makers, so the people who have actually built this product. And what I'll be doing is adding a list, because I'll be adding a list of users to the list of makers here. And the list that I would like to add is the repeating group makers. The state that we've created, that is the makers. So if you remember, we were adding in that custom state where we were temporarily storing a list of users. We can now add all of those users stored within our repeating group to our list in our database. Now, after we've finished creating the product and the product content within our workflow, there's a few additional steps we'll need to create. If you're familiar with one thing you'll note, and I'll jump over to the website now, is that the products are categorized by the date that they were published. So I can see here there is all of the products that were published today. If I scroll on down, I can see that there will be other products posted yesterday and then on different dates. And this is again an experience we'll need to replicate within our own bubble editor. So I'll jump back into our editor here. And what we'll need to do is actually, after creating a product, we'll need to actually create a date that it was launched on. And then once we've created that date, we can add that product to it. So essentially on our homepage, I would like to have a repeating group that displays a list of dates. And then within that repeating group, I would like to display a list of all the products that were launched on that day. So what I'll be doing is creating another action here. I'll head to my data tab and I'll select to create a new thing. The thing I would like to create is the publish date. Now for this publish date, when it's created, it will automatically store a value of the timestamp of when this in fact was added to our database. However, I'd also like to create my own custom timestamp that formats this as a text input in my database. So I will select to add a field and I will choose the date text option. And then the date text that I would store is the result of step 2, so the time that our new product has been created. I would like to store its creation date. And then I would like to format this as text, not just a string of numbers. So the way I'll be formatting this is by scrolling on down here to the option that displays the month, the current date, and then also the year that that's published within. And by doing this, it will allow me to reference a written version of the date that I can then compare to other products that are published on the same written date. And now that I've created a new date within our database that I can use to display on our homepage, I will then add the actual product to this date, meaning that on here, the 22nd of April, this product that we're creating was published. So I will add in another field. I will choose the products on date, which was a list of products in our database, and I will select to add to it once again, the result of step 2, so the product that we've just created. Now there's one edge case I'd like to just highlight and explain here. So as it stands, we're currently creating a new date every time a product is published. But what about when this current date that's formatted as a text input already exists? In that case, I won't want to create a new date. Instead, all I want to do is actually just add a product onto that existing date. So that would mean that on the 22nd of April, let's say there were 10 products that are launched, I would like my home page to only display the 22nd of April once, and then within that display a list of all of the 10 products that were published on that exact date. Which means that I'll need to create a condition to this workflow to avoid a new publish date being created every time someone wants to launch a product. So I'll select to add a condition here, and essentially I'll be searching through my database and identifying if the current date formatted as text does in fact already exist. And when that does exist, I won't want this step within my workflow to run. So I'll start by performing a search here, and I'll be searching through our list of entries for the publish dates. And what I'd like to do is essentially just create a constraint that identifies if the date that's saved as text in our database is the same as the current date. And if there are no matches between an existing date that's been published, I will allow this workflow to run. And if there aren't any instances, it won't run. So I'll be adding a new constraint. I'll be selecting from the date text data field, and I'll want to identify when the date formatted as text equals the same value, if I scroll on down to the current date time. And once again, I'll need to format this as the same option that I chose before. So that way the text of this current date is the same as the text that I've stored within my database. And what I'll need to do now is identify if there are any instances where the date text of a published date equals the same value as the current date. And if there aren't any existing dates, which means that this product would be the first product being published on this date, I will want to create that date. So I'll scroll on down to the rest of my condition here. And after I perform that search for all of our dates, I can identify when the count is, and I will type in the number 0. So when there are no instances of a published date already existing for the current date and time, this workflow will create a new published date, and it will then add that product to that published date. Now, after creating a date, we'll need to add another step in our workflow that registers the date formatted as text to our product. So essentially, because I'm storing the date formatted as text for our published date data type, what I can do is also store the date formatted as text for our product data type. And then on our homepage, because they would technically have the same value, I can choose to overlap those as a constraint in a repeating group. And I know this can sound a little bit confusing now, but when we get to the stage of building out our homepage, I'll explain all of this in more detail. But for the time being, we will create another step in our workflow here, and we'll head to our data tab and we'll choose to make changes to a thing. And the thing we would like to change is the product that we've just created. And what we'll need to do is actually store the date formatted as text within it. So I will select to make changes to a thing. And then the thing I will change is the result of step 2 in our workflow, which is the new product that we've created. And the field that I'll be changing is the product launch date formatted as text. And from here, this will need to equal, I'll scroll on down to the current date time. And of course, I'll be formatting this. I'll choose my format type to be the exact same entry as we've used before. So the full date written out, the date itself, and the year within this. And then there's one last step I'd like to add to this workflow after a product has been created, and that is just adding in a redirect that sends a user through to a page where they can view the details of their newly listed product. So this will just be a simple navigation event. So I'll choose to add another action. I'll head on down to the navigation option and choose the go to page option. And at this point, the destination page doesn't exist, so I can choose to create a new page, and I will call this the product page. So this will just be a page that displays the full information of every product across our application. So I'll opt to create that page. Now, before I finish building out this step in our workflow, I will just need to update the type of content of that product page. So I'll head on over to our page drop-down menu. I'll click on our product page. I'll head to the Design tab, and the only thing I'll be doing right now is updating the type of content to display a product, because of course I'll be displaying the information of an individual product on this page. Then I will head back over to my page drop down, jump over to my Submission tab, open up my workflow editor, open the workflow I was just creating when the launch button is clicked, head to the step 5 within our workflow and update the destination page to be our product page, and the data I would like to send through it is the result of step 2 in our workflow, so the product that we have created. And that is all I will need to include within this workflow. I know this one was a little bit complex, so as I always say, if you found yourself confused at any time, I would recommend pausing the tutorial and rewinding it to get a better understanding of all of the steps within our workflow here. I know that the stages with the dates formatted as text can be a little confusing, but when we build out our home page, this will make a lot more sense, as it'll easily allow you to replicate the same experience as the Product Hunt homepage. Let's jump into our bubble preview now and experience what this whole process looks like. And in order to do this, I will head over to our new page to begin with, where we were storing the URL initially for a new product. And now I'll show you what the experience looks like from this page through to actually launching a product. Over on my new submission page here, I'm going to add in a website link. I'll just add in the link to Building with Bubble. I will then select the next option, and this will send us through to our submission page here. I will then give the product a name, Building with Bubble. I'll add a tagline, no code courses. And one thing I've noticed here is that the website link hasn't sent through from our initial page. And that is because I have just forgotten to add in the initial content. So let's jump back over into our bubble editor and I'll show you how we can do this. So if I head into my submission page here, I will open up the submission 1 group, which prompts users to give some general information about their product. And what I'll need to do is select the website link input field here, and I will need to add some initial content to this. Now, if you remember from the first page in our submission process where a user was adding in the link, we were also sending through the custom page parameter of that website link. So what I'll need to do is retrieve that link from our URL and then display that in this input field here. So I'll select to insert dynamic data. I will then scroll on down to the bottom and choose the Get Data from Page URL option. And then I'll need to extract the information from the parameter we created, which was called product link. And now that will display that link once it's been sent through to our page. So let's head over and retry what that whole experience looks like, and I'll show you how that data can be sent. So once again, I'm on my first page for the submission process. I will add in my website link. I will then select next. That will send us through to the first page in our submission process. And you can now see that that link has been stored within our input field. I will just once again give a name to my product. I'll add the tagline. And then I will upload a thumbnail image. From here, I'll select the next button, and that will change the state of our page, which means it will hide our first group and then display the second one here. I can then upload a list of images. I've got some stored within this file here. I'll just drag those in, and you'll see once they've uploaded, they will display a preview in our repeating group element here. If there were more than 3, I could scroll across, and I'll just add in a short description. No code courses with Bubble. And then once I'm happy with the images that I've added and the description, I can select through to the next page, which will once again change the state of the page and hide our current group that we were using and now display our third group, which allows us to search through the list of makers. In this case, I would like to add myself as a maker, Lachlan Kirkwood, and then I've also added a friend to the platform here, Jack Jones. I'd like to add him as a maker. And now I can choose to launch this product. That workflow will run. It will create a new date because a date doesn't exist. And then it will send us through to our product page, as you can see in our URL string here. And it's sending through the unique ID of the product that we've just created. Now finally we can jump back into our Notion doc here, and I can tick off that I have finally built a workflow or process to be able to publish products across our platform. This was by far one of the bigger modules within our tutorial today, and I know it can seem a little bit overwhelming. However, if you were following along, you would have been able to replicate the exact same workflows and processes that I have created throughout this experience. So I will tick that off that I have finally built that feature. And that is all I have time for in this tutorial today. If you are interested in checking out the rest of the course, I'd recommend clicking the link in the description to purchase the full course. Within the complete course, I'll be walking you through the step-by-step instructions to complete the rest of our build. You can also get access to a suite of Bubble tutorials where you'll learn how to build other popular products. If you'd like to get started building some other popular products for free, I'll be sure to include some suggested links at the end of this video. Thanks again for taking the time to watch, and be sure to hit that subscribe button if you'd like to see any other useful tutorials to help you on your Bubble journey.